Hello, welcome to the conversation here on News Central Television. This is the program where we bring you all the latest political happenings on the continent of Africa. I am Benga Aboroa.
And I am Rita Omodia. Today on the conversation, we will tell you how the Northern Elders have asked President Muhammadu Buhari to resign over insecurity. They added that Nigerians cannot continue to be killed and raped by terrorists. Secondly, we will be discussing the ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis, as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has reached out to the African Union for support against Russia's aggression and requested to address the continental organization.
But first, let's start in Nigeria, where insecurity in the nation is growing exponentially as each day passes by. As a result of this, the Northern Elders Forum has demanded the immediate resignation of the President Muhammadu Buhari. The forum lamented that killings and assaults in communities have now become a daily feature in the lives of Nigerians, as traveling anywhere is now risky, and the option of staying put does not make anyone safer.
Meanwhile, the president has blown hot in reaction to the wanton killings, describing it as heinous, and said the perpetrators should not be spared or forgiven. He urged residents of the North Central state to expose the perpetrators of such incidents, their sponsors, and those who encourage such criminals who carry out these dastardly acts of murder, so that the law will take its course. We have joined us live on the conversation Dr. Jide Johnson, a public affairs analyst. We also have Captain Bish Johnson, U.S. Army retired. He is a national defense and security strategist. Gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So I'll start with you, Dr. Jide. From the Northern Elders Forum, 7 years of being in office, do you agree the President, Muhammadu Buhari, still has no answer to security challenges across the country?
With respect to the call by the forum requiring the President to resign, I think that they are playing their script. And they are just begging the question and grandstanding. We have gone beyond the call for the President to resign or not to resign. If this call had come 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and it would have been a welcome development. We are the twilight of President Muhammadu Buhari administration. By May, less than a year to the end of the administration, they are just waking up to their responsibility and asking the President to resign when the issue of insecurity and wanton killing, kidnapping of Nigerians and collection of ransom from innocent and helpless Nigerians has been a theme of recurrent feature under this administration and even before this administration came into power. And in actual sense, one of the major factors that helped this present administration to gain power is the issue of dealing with the insecurity challenges that we have and having a former retired military man coming into the saddle of the presidency before this could be solved. As far as I'm concerned, they are just grandstanding and in politics. It is a serious issue that requires a collective approach in solving the problem.
Now, I'd like to bring in Captain Johnson. Captain Johnson, as a former retired Army personnel and defense and security analyst, what are we not doing right? We've seen service chiefs were sacked last year. Nigeria spent billions of dollars on military hardware, and we know this is a sort of asymmetrical warfare. Even the almighty United States Army left Afghanistan after 20 years, and there's a debate on whether they defeated the Taliban or not. My question to you is this: what are we not doing right, and is this war against insurgency winnable?
All right. First and foremost, thank you for having me on. Before I answer your question, let me respond to the question you asked my co-panelists and my brother, who bears the same surname as mine. Look, the Northern Elders Forum is just grandstanding. I don't think that it makes any sense that we should be asking for a president who has less than a year to leave office to resign. Since Muhammadu Buhari came into office, we have been having this repeated insecurity all over the country. The first year, this Northern Elders Forum never called for him to resign. They didn't call his second year. They didn't call third. They waited until he has a few months to leave office to call for him to resign. For me, I think that's a grandstanding and just trying to be politically correct. This call would have made sense had they done that, some 4 years ago, 5 years ago, not at this point in time. Now, coming to your question, what are we not? And also, let me also correct one statement that you've made regarding the U.S. and the Taliban. Look, the war against terrorism that the U.S. carried out in Afghanistan was in Afghanistan. It's not in the United States. So this is a question of missing apples and oranges here. There can never be a homegrown terrorist on the soil of America that will torment America like terrorists are tormenting Nigeria on our soil. Afghanistan is far and thousands of miles away from the United States. So those two are not, you can't compare both. We are dealing with insecurity, terrorism, banditry right here on our soil. I wish this problem is somewhere else outside Nigeria and Nigerians asked to come and solve the problem. That would be a different scenario. Nigerians are the ones who are getting killed. In Afghanistan, the people who are dying were the Afghans. The Afghans, not Americans.
American citizens.
Now, not American citizens at all. Now, what are we not doing right? We are doing so many things. The question is, what are we even doing right? We are doing so many things wrong. In the sense that, look, the federal government has proven to be incapable of giving Nigerians the type of policing that Nigerians desire. Over-concentration of policing in the hands of the central government is the reason why the country is in disarray. The federal government has proven to be ineffective, inefficient, and incapable of protecting lives and property. So if you ask me, I would say just like we have done with other things, we should liberalize security, devolve security. Let subnational governments get involved. Let the private sector get involved because the federal government alone has so far shown that it does not have the capacity to provide security that we deserve in this country. What we need is more boots on the ground. Look, let me tell you, if you add all the security agencies in Nigeria, if you put all of them together, they are roughly about 1.3 million. And you're talking about a country of over 200 million people with vast land mass. That number is grossly insufficient, is grossly inadequate. They are poorly funded. They are poorly trained. So what we are asking them to do is to do magic. And they cannot do magic. Our political leaders must understand that we don't have the kind of security architecture that we desire to be able to secure our lives and property. That is the simple truth. There is problem all over the country, and all these security agents are spread far and thin. They just have a few manpower here and there, and those manpower are just not enough to provide adequate security in the areas that they are deployed. That is the simple truth.
Okay,
and
Captain,
that's the problem.
Captain Bishop, I'd like to continue from where you stopped there. You talked about decentralizing the policing system, and one of the solutions was also community policing, and this brought about the Amotekun. Now, how effective do you think this has been in Nigeria, especially in the Southwest?
Well, if you look now, the Southwest seems to be one of the most peaceful regions in this country. I don't know if that can be attributable to the Amotekun or the citizens of the Southwest. However, I am not a fan of regional policing. I am feeling because when you have regional police, you have different governments that we have to come together to make decisions. Now, what I'm advocating, and which I have been a proponent of, is that let every state have their own police. I understand the concerns of those who are opposed to, having state police and what they think the governors are going to do with the police. But the thing is that if you lay it side by side, you will discover that there's more advantage in having state police than not having it at all. Because we can't continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. The state governments are not, doing enough. They're not doing enough because they don't own the police. The police and all the other security agencies belong to the federal government. The most and the much those states, those subnational government can do is to provide housing, operational vehicles, but they can't send these folks to training because it does not make any sense for me as a governor to send Sergeant Awolabi to training, say, in anti-terrorism in Israel, knowing fully well that when Sergeant Awolbi returns to Nigeria, there's a possibility that he may be redeployed from my state to another state. So I just wasted my state money. So it's not only that the state governments are not bringing in enough resources, they are not providing adequate training, they are only doing the peripheral, what I may call the peripheral in terms of supporting law enforcement and security agencies in their state, because those people are not permanent in their state. So they don't want to waste their money. So that's why I am saying that we should decentralize police, just like you have it in other federations. You know, nobody's saying that federal police should be abrogated. No, the federal police should be in place to enforce federal laws, but we should have subnational police who will be there to enforce subnational laws like the ones that our state houses of assembly are making every day. We can put some regulations in place to ensure that those police are not abused. It's like that in every federation. And I can tell you that one of the tenets of democracy is that when you ask the people to go and govern themselves, you must equally allow that same people to secure themselves. That is a social contract that is always between the state and the state and the citizens. In this case, it appears that our state is very clear that our state has failed monumentally in keeping to its own side of the social contract.
Now, thank you, Captain Johnson. I'd like to bring in Dr. G.A. Johnson here. Dr. Johnson, do you agree with Captain Johnson's assertion that it's time to look at the security architecture of Nigeria and perhaps give state governors the power to form their own state policing? Opponents of that say we're not ripe enough, looking at the political setup in Nigeria, and they say, you know, state governors would use the security apparatus of the state to go against their opponents. What's your take on all of this?
As a whole, and let's look at the composition and the nature of diversity or inclusion of the security architecture of Nigeria under Buhari's administration. Now, you've seen that what qualifies you to be a member of the security team of this present administration? It's the product of where you are from and probably the language you speak. And a lot of people spoke extensively against the composition. They said our strength is in diversity, our unity is in diversity. But we see the composition of the security architecture of this country being narrow, not being inclusive, and a lot of people defended the president with respect to composition. Just look at the head of all security agencies and the rest of them. When you look at national security team, and then you understand that from that itself, we don't have an holistic, inclusive composition of security agencies that gives alternative viewpoint, that has a different worldview to pre-existing worldview that constitute that. And the Northern Elders Forum did not speak. Because what qualifies, look at the various appointments to the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Naval Staff, the head of police, the head of DSS, and the rest of it. You always see that there is no national interest, quote unquote, with respect to that. Now, coming to...
Sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Johnson, but looking at that type of appointment and knowing that the vast majority of Nigeria's security concerns and those who it affects most from the northern part of the country, don't you think it's one of the reasons why these appointments were made in the first place, because they can relate more to the violence?
That's not how to run a nation. That's not how to run a nation. You run a nation bringing out the best. You know how many generals were retired based on appointment of junior officers in the military to head the various military formations that we have when there were changes, because there were clamor for changes. And for 6 years, the president did not change service chief. They were held there. They were not held accountable. And when those changes were made, and other changes were made, they were made on the basis of bringing junior officers, and they have certain extraction. What qualifies you based on the extraction you are from? And where you mortgage principles and you mortgage merit, you get mediocrity. And where when you don't have an inclusive administration, then you are what you are, because it is narrow, it is myopic, and you are limited to one worldview. And that's my take, that's my opinion. I might be wrong, but the Northern elders did not talk about that. Coming to the issue of state.
Okay, let's hear from you, Captain Bish. Now, Dr. Johnson was talking about inclusive administration being one of the banes in Nigeria, especially with the strength in diversity. But now we have rampant killings. We see destruction even at security posts, which gives you alarm that probably our security apparatus is not necessarily well equipped enough. But the president, during the declaration now, while reacting to the wanton killing, said that the perpetrators will not be spared no matter what. But over time, we've seen repentant bandits being rehabilitated into the society. Do you think this contradicts this? What is your take on bandits who are so-called repentant?
Well, let me tell you, look, the president's, marching orders and words do not have any meaning anymore. They have no value. This president has been saying all these things for the past 7 years. Remember when he came into office, security was one of the issues that he said he was going to address. And this is a man who was a former major general who served in the highest office in the land as the head of state. And he said one of the issues that he will address in his administration is security. From every indication, from every indices, from all statistics, the security situation in the country is worse off now than it was when Muhammadu Buhari became the president of this country. So whatever the president says has absolutely no meaning. It has no value. It has no relevance. It has no importance to the issue in the country right now. It's unfortunate. I am saying this, but it's unfortunate, but I have to let Nigerians know that Mr. Buhari or President Buhari or Major General Buhari, whatever you want to address him as, does not have the capacity to solve the problem in this country. The security problem we have in Nigeria will continue to linger even after Muhammad Buhari leaves office. So he's going to kick the can down the road and wait for the next president to come and fix it. So it's not about what he says. We're talking about what he does. And what he does not seem to work. He has not worked for the first year. It's not working now, and it's never going to work again. So Nigerians, we are going to have to endure the situation until we see what happens after the 2023 election. So, now, go ahead.
I was going to bring in Dr. Johnson to hear his take on state policing and what solutions do you have to Nigeria's insurmountable security problems?
Well, it's very simple, with the exception of the British government that colonized Nigeria do not have the centralized police system that we have in Nigeria. The centralized police system was used to foster colonialism, and we have discovered that it does not work. This federal structure that we have, how can you bring a police officer, for example, from LMN in Port Harcourt, and you bring him to Lagos to be the DPU, or you bring someone from Bauchi to come to Mushin? You see, we need to localize, even if we are still battling with the issue of the politicization of state policing. At least at the federal level, what we could do is to localize the operation of the federal police
and personnel.
Let people serve in their communities. Policing is about understanding the community. It's about knowing who is who within the community. For example, I know everybody in my community. I've lived in that community. There's no DPO you can bring to my community. A community I've lived for 40 years. If you bring, it does not know the inside out of the community. I know all the dark alleys in that community. Now imagine someone that has that experience of that community. You bring him in to police that environment, then you are sure of having 60% of your security, of your intelligence gathering is secure. Because the issue with security is about intelligence gathering. It's about intelligence gathering. You ask yourself, what is the level of... It is not the presence of personnel that tells you about whether there is security or no security. When the president of the United States of America comes to an area, you will see the way our own police and everything are deployed. They are carrying guns, carrying everything. No. But the level of intelligence that will have been put in place, the deployment of resources that the collaboration between the various agencies, the state police, which are the state troopers, plus the local police, plus the FBI, work together as a team. So you can't expect somebody in Abuja, the IG in Abuja, to know about who to post to head. You should be left for somebody in Lagos who understands Lagos, somebody in Sokoto who understands Sokoto to do that. So the high time we embrace this issue of community policing, the better. It's easier for us to have ISBA police, but it's not easy for us to have community policing. And if we don't, we can't address. You see, the issue of insecurity came before Buhari came into power. This issue will still bedevil the incoming administration that will come to power in 2023 until we change our approach on dealing with this security issue. You know, Zig Ziglar said, for us to do the same thing, the same manner, and expect to get a different result is the beginning of insanity. We are taught that bringing in a general, a retired general, will solve the problem. Rather than solve the problem, we see that the problem keeps growing up to become an hydra-headed problem, that it has even confounded a military general in the form of the president. So there is the need for us to have a rethink and for us to embrace a different approach. And if that approach requires us engaging in community policing, I recall what the president said when they were talking about the issue of insecurity. He said in one of the interviews that let the governors go back and do what they're supposed to do. That is, the governors should relate to their traditional rulers and relate with community heads to deal with the issue. I'll give you an example, and then I'll allow you to continue. What happened in the southeast, specifically in Anambra State, over the weekend, we saw how community engagement was able to identify some tough spots in some certain local government in Anambra State. If not for the intervention of the community and the cooperation of the community, that can never be done. Like Captain Johnson said, what's the total number? If you work out the ratio of the total number of the security personnel that we have in Nigeria to the population of Nigeria, you know that times 10, if not times 20 or 100, we are much more than the security personnel that we have. So they are overwhelmed, they are overstretched, but there's need for us to have everything. It has to do with intelligence gathering. That's where community policing comes in.
All right, Dr. Jide, I'll stay with you there. Now, aside localizing the policing system and, of course, intelligence gathering, let's look at the funding and security system. Over time, we've heard of large amounts of money going into the system, especially for equipment. And we've even had personnel going back and saying that they do not have enough equipment to fight these bandits. Now, it's said that insecurity in Nigeria is backed by corruption and corrupt people in every sector. How do you feel corruption has once again affected the security system in Nigeria?
You see, all right. When we talk insecurity, I usually refer to people to Obasanjo's 2013 letter, the letter I wrote to Jonathan in 2013, December 8th to be precise, and page 8 and the last paragraph in that letter. And I asked them to read some of the things Obasanjo highlighted in that letter, and which most people did not pay any attention to, which Jonathan himself did not pay attention to, which concerns administration. The issue of insecurity is beyond corruption. The corruption is bigger and deeper than what the ordinary eyes can see. And I usually also ask people to watch this movie by Nicolas Cage, The Lord of War. All these are a reflection of what happens in the society. And then you understand that the fight for insecurity, there are a lot of things that are involved. There's human trafficking that is involved. There's drug trafficking that is involved. There's money laundering that is involved in it. You see, you just read the last paragraph of Obasanjo's letter, and you see that Obasanjo has given us the challenges that we have and the solution to solving this particular problem.
Okay. Thank you. Just before we wrap things up, Captain Johnson, you did earlier advocate for state policing as a way of solving our insurmountable security challenges in Nigeria. What other methods or approaches can Nigeria adopt to solve this crisis?
Well, my co-panelist, Jide, has already mentioned some of the other things that we can do to take control of the security situation in the country. One of the things that he mentioned is the engagement of our traditional institutions. And that's one of the areas that we have gotten this thing wrong. If you go back in the days, this country was never used to be like this. And at that point, when there was security in this country, is because we were using our community resources, which includes the traditional institutions, in providing security. Like Jide said, there is nobody that comes into your community that will understand your community better than yourself. It does not make any sense to go and bring someone from Sokoto and you take him to Bayelsa and you think that he will be effective. First and foremost, he wouldn't understand the culture, he will not understand the language, and he has to deal with the local people that may not even speak English. And so security is local. We have to look at community resources, the local resources at our disposal, and figure out how to effectively employ and deploy them to make our lives safer. There is no two ways about it. The whole security architecture that we are using right now is what was inherited from our colonial masters. We have done little or nothing to upgrade and update them so that they can meet the current and evolving challenges that we are facing today, which are quite different from the ones that we.
All right. Thank you very much. I'd like to say thank you very much to you, gentlemen, Dr. Jide Johnson, a public affairs analyst, and Captain Bis Johnson, a veteran of the United States Army, for joining us on the conversation. It's time to take a break, and when we return, we'll be talking about the African Union. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has reached out to the African Union's chairperson, the person of Senegalese President Macky Sall, and has asked for an audience to address the African Union. We'll be looking at this and more when we return from this break.
Thanks for staying with us. You're still watching the conversation right here on News Central TV. Now, on the first belt, we dealt with insecurity challenges in Nigeria, of which the Northern Elders Forum has asked that the President, Muhammadu Buhari, should resign. And it's also important to know that on April 14, about 8 years ago, we had attack in a particular federal government school, that's the Chibok girls, which caused a lot of rancor on social media, calling for the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. And of course, a lot is being said that the federal government should do enough to forestall such insecurities in the country. And now on the second belt, we're dealing with issues from the Ukraine and Russia crisis, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has requested to address the African Union. Senegalese President Macky Sall said on Sunday. Sall, the current AU chairman, tweeted that he and Zelensky had discussed over the phone the economic impact of the war in Ukraine and the need to favor dialogue for a negotiated outcome to the conflict. The Ukrainian president also asked to address the AU. That is what the President Macky Sall has said.
The request comes amidst a divided African response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For example, 58 countries abstained from an April 7th vote in the United Nations General Assembly that suspended Russia from the United Nations Human Rights Council over its invasion. Africa accounted for 24 of the abstaining countries, which included Senegal. 9 other African countries voted in favor of the resolution and 9 voted against. Now, joining us to discuss this is Dr. Oluwaseun Teller, is the head of future diplomacy at the Institute of Future Knowledge, University of Johannesburg, South Africa. And also joining us in the later part of the show is Vigwe Ugwegu, policy analyst at Development Reimagined. He joins from Abuja. Warm welcome to you, Dr. Oluwaseun.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Now, what do you make of President Zelensky's request to address the African Union? What does he aim to achieve by addressing the African Union?
Yeah, thanks for the important question. I think the call can be located within the context of President Zelensky's global charm offensive, which seems to me to be a subtle and perhaps the most appropriate weapon at his disposal in light of the asymmetric war between its country and Russia, evident in the fact that Moscow has the world's largest nuclear arsenal stockpile, while Kyiv has nil. And Russia's military personnel is 4 times more than that of Ukraine's. So essentially, the call can be seen in the context of a species to parliaments and international organizations across the globe, including the US Congress, German, British, French, as well as Israeli parliament, and also the United Nations and the European Union. And it is instructive to know that during this speeches, President Zelensky has received standing ovations across this parliament and international organizations. And I think I must also note that this is primarily to achieve international support in his administration's quest to win the war. And in order to influence the psyche of his listeners, President Zelensky often exhibits his rhetorical prowess, drawing attention to historic events and tragedies, such as the Berlin Wall and 9/11, while he was addressing both German and American parliament. And he also uses emotive phrases and sentences, such as when he noted that you need to prove you are with us. He also noted that if you fail to live up to this moment, then shame on you. In a nutshell, the call is to garner African support and possibly influence African states to have a common voice on the Ukrainian crisis. As you noted earlier, it is instructive that while Africa seems to be divided on the crisis, many African states have either been neutral or muted in their criticism of the war in Ukraine against the backdrop of Russia's long-standing relationship with the continent since the Cold War era. For example, as you noted earlier, during the recent UN General Assembly resolution that was held in earlier this month to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council, 9 of the countries in Africa voted against the resolution, while 24 African countries abstained. Thank you.
Okay, now talking about this neutrality, I remember then that representative to the United Nations as Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, she mentioned this, that African countries should not be neutral in this vote. Do you feel that that is a position for African countries? Can't we be neutral if we want to be? Do we have to be in the middle of the situation going on between Russia and Ukraine?
Okay. See, as I rightly noted, given the fact that the U.S. is a major player in this conflict, the U.S. has tried as much as it can to, put diplomatic pressure on African governments to support sanctions imposed on Russia. And for me, Washington has not been successful in this regard. For example, following South Africa's third abstention on Russia's action in the latest UN resolution, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa received a call from the US President Joe Biden, in which the latter stressed a unified international response to Russian aggression in Ukraine. And it is also important to note that although the African Union has condemned the Russian aggression, the lack of a consensus among African leaders has undermined American effort. And for me, we also noted the effort on the part of the US ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield. I don't think I need to reiterate that statement. But for me, the reason behind Africa's resolution, Africa's actions stem from a number of reasons. You will agree with me that although the preamble of the founding act of the African Union calls for collective action in Africa and in our relations with the rest of the world, but what we have witnessed in the past few months, it's a divided Africa with respect to the Ukrainian conflict. And some of the reasons for this include the fact that China's position on Russia has influenced some African states' stances on the war against the backdrop of the fact that China is Africa's largest trade partner, having surpassed the United States in 2009. This implies that some African states' abstention may not necessarily be a pro-Russian stance, but reflects their strong ties with China. Also, some African states have stressed Washington's double standards by drawing attention to American wars in Iraq, and from an African perspective, of course, in Libya. And furthermore, some African leaders see the rationale in maintaining a neutral stance in the conflict in light of their volatile economic market, growing and increasingly frustrated young populations, as well as their security challenges. And in order to combat and mitigate some of these challenges, African states collaborate with a number of these global powers. So for them, taking sides may not necessarily be a strategic move. And this is also complicated by the fact that the US is increasingly seen as an unreliable partner in view of the failure of its foreign policy in the past. And an example that really comes to mind, I think, it's the incident that happened in 2021, following the United States decision to pause an arms deal with Nigeria over concerns about human rights violations. Yeah. Nigeria turned to Russia in its quest to fight against Boko Haram. And similarly, when France withdrew from Mali in February, the West African country turned to Russia. It is instructive to note that Russia is the largest supplier of arms to Africa.
Now, Dr. Teller, looking at the current situation in Africa, and I'm happy you mentioned developments on the continent, there's currently a war that has been ravaging for 17 months in the northern part of Ethiopia, in Tigray. The United Nations has described it as the biggest humanitarian catastrophe of the last decade. Should we not be concerned with our own, with finding solutions to our own problems, then get bogged down in the war between Ukraine and Russia? And why does President Zelensky want to talk to the African Union? Will he change Putin's mind?
Okay, to address the first question, with respect to the notion of African solution to African challenges, it is important to note that when we talk about this notion, it's not just about Africa solely finding solutions to these challenges, because Africa still needs to rely on their partners, particularly those who are their security partner in terms of in the security rate, to actually combat and fight some of the wars, such as Boko Haram, terrorism, and all the insecurity, to address other insecurity challenges in the country. So African solution to African problem does not necessarily imply that Africa should solely combat the challenges in Africa. Africa still needs to rely on this external
but
forces.
looking at
what it simply implies is that Africa should take the lead. Africa should take the lead in responding to this
But my
challenges.
issue is we have serious issues that are bugging us down. And why is the Ukrainian president's speech to the African Union, why should it be a priority? Why should we even grant him audience?
It is important to know that it's a global international system. Despite the fact that we have our challenges, it doesn't mean that we cannot intervene or we cannot interfere in an important crisis such as the Russian-Ukrainian war. I think Africa cannot be a bystander, given the fact that this crisis, it's one of the most fundamental phenomenon that has struck the world in the last century or so. So it's important that Africa does not have as a bystander, but make its position known and in a way influence the crisis that the world is currently being saddled with. Because whether we like it or not, what's happening in Ukraine today significantly affects the entire world. So in terms of the second question you asked, I think as I noted earlier, Zelensky's intention is to garner international support because obviously Russia's military might drives Ukraine. So the only weapon at his disposal is to use his charm offensive to garner international support, to get the support of as many possible states as it can to wage this war against Russia.
Okay, now looking at the effect of this war on the Russian-Ukraine war, because you said Africa cannot necessarily be a bystander. We see Mali and Sudan somehow looking for affections with Russia. And also, we know that the African Union has condemned the invasion, but we see that there's a bit of a lopsidedness, especially when it comes to the sanctions on Russia. Do you see this having any effect, the relationship between Russia and Africa, if Africa were supposed to pick a side?
Absolutely. And I think that's why a number of African countries have been very, very careful because they know that if they are seen as taking sides, that may jeopardize their relations with the key powers that they have maintained strong ties with. Given the challenges in Africa, you have different countries that provide different, strategic interests, that promote their strategic and economic interests in Africa. And these countries, Africa, also try to, benefit in so many ways. For instance, in the economic realm, as I highlighted earlier, China is Africa's largest trade partner, and Africa will be watchful of what China's position is on this crisis. And that explains why a number of countries in Africa would jump on the bandwagon, given China's position.
Okay.
Dr. Teller, just before we wrap things up, we have a statement here from Professor Kwesi Enin of the Kofi Annan Institute of Peace Studies. And he says, and I quote, "This guy," he was referring to Zelensky, is very funny. He should speak to Asian, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations first. He never uttered a word when our citizens were abused. He made his choices based on his national interest calculus. Why does he think we won't make the calculus based on our own national interest? His cousins in Europe have refused to help him and take risks. What's your thoughts and Professor Enin's statement with regards to Zelensky's request to address the African Union as we wrap up?
And even adding to that, we also know that he also wanted to address, or rather the Ukraine ambassador wanted to address the Kenyan parliament. So what's your take on all this?
Yeah, I think it's fine for him to at least attempt to address in a number of states, because obviously he doesn't have the military mind to fight Russia. So the only thing he can rely on is to try and influence the psyche of the most important states and organizations as a same fit, in order to help them on his side against Russia. I don't necessarily think that granting him the audience, granting him the opportunity to address the African Union would significantly shape or would significantly have an impact on the positions of the state. For instance, Eritrea, the first resolution, Eritrea that decided to vote against that resolution has strong ties with Russia in terms of military supply of weapons. So I don't think that would significantly influence Eritrea's position. South Africa also, that has abstained in the three occasions. I don't think that would influence South Africa's position, given the fact that South Africa is a strong ally of China, and South Africa is one of the members of the BRICS alliance, which also has Russia. So I think addressing the African Union, in my view, will not significantly shape the positions of different African states on this issue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oluwaseun Tella, of the head Future of Diplomacy Institute for the Future of Knowledge, University of Johannesburg. Thanks for your insight and knowledge on this subject. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
That's it. And today's the conversation in the first half of the show, we did talk about security challenges in Nigeria, and we just concluded our conversation with Dr. Tella and the Ukrainian president's request to address the African Union. And that's all we can take on today's edition of The Conversation. See you on Friday. I am Benga Aboroa.
And I am Rita Omodia.